guys, this is Reinhardt, it's your favorite Russian talking, and this is gonna be introduction/guide video to a Necromancer of a Skyforge. But most importantly, we're gonna talk about the Necromancer feel, what developers are seeing and what's their vision of the class itself, because a lot of people, I think that they're missing the importance of a Necromancer and its playstyle. Talk about Necromancer, what kind of class is that? If using World of Warcraft terms, I would say Necromancer is a perfect hybrid between the Shadow Priest feel in terms of DPS rotation, the Affliction luck, and it has a different roles changing all the time. Talk about Necromancer's strengths and weaknesses. So first of all, for the strength, he does decent, really heavy damage the lower the enemies are. He is very tanky. He has multiple ways to mitigate the enemy damage and heal himself back to full. While his abilities does cost his own health, at the same time he has multiple ways to bring that health up. So for the tankiness, he is one of the best casters in the game. And the second thing is his damage. He does have a decent spread damage, but really heavy damage when the enemies are below 40% HP. He also has some of the best snares in the game via his Cursed Ground that can actually pull targets back, and his Fear also is very bursty, or can set up a huge burst. One of the weaknesses of Necromancers are, first of all, very low damage to high HP targets, very high cooldown based on your CC. He has only one Fear that actually is a 1 minute cooldown. So while he does have a tankiness and he can be up front in the front lines doing damage and kicking asses and taking names, at the same time he is very weak on the CC department, so he cannot be extremely good killer for the team, and he needs to know when to do that. Also, you cannot tunnel as a Necromancer as well. You need to know which targets are going down and assist your team with the kills. Let's take a look about Necromancer mechanic in general. What is actually class is about? The class is actually have a one main resource. There's no mana, there's just a one very small resource. It's your own health. Basically the way it works is every big abilities cost of your own health. Like for example, it takes about 15. For me to do just basic rotation right now, it actually took about 35% of my hit points just to actually do it. Now, having the ability that costs HP will basically put you at the low end and you will die very shortly. So to counter that, Necromancer has another mechanic which talks about the Lich form. You transform yourself in a Lich form and you can actually heal yourself back to full, and it has two different mechanics on how to heal back to full. You can either do a really good heavy melee damage to heal back to full, or dot up and do a small nuke on the range damage, and I'll talk about my build here as well. So the mechanics is very interesting. You sacrifice your health to do damage to actually put out your minions, and then you turn it around, you transform yourself into a Lich to heal yourself back to full. That's what makes the Necromancer somewhat challenging class, because you have to always try to balance it out, your own HP levels with the Lich, and because it's very easy to line of sight Necromancer in a Lich form or to see him, he can literally kill himself. Your sustained damage comes essentially from the dot called Plague. The way it works is if you do a left right click combination, you're gonna apply a dot that does infinitely more damage the low HP levels of the enemy. And where the kind of like Shadow Priest feel attaches to it is when you actually throw the skull at your opponent, and they will increase the PP damage the target takes by 21% for 5 seconds, making Necromancer a really great kill assist class. On top of it, making a Necromancer very heavy dot centric class where you dot up the target fully, and then after that you basically have throw the skull at it for increased damage. In the beginning of the fight, you actually want to play defensive as a Necromancer, as defensive as possible, where you don't want the enemy team to set up the kills on your team as well. So the actually peeling with your AoE snare, actually gripping them back, applying some of the dots, applying your pads, and just kind of messing around, and usually popping your defensive at specific times will guarantee that your enemy team's damage, that your own team's damage is going to be sinking in. After that, using some of your elements of burst that I'm going to explain you in just a second, via Rift Horrors, Throw Skulls, you start running your enemy's HP lower and lower. And then also Lich form with actually added poisons also works extremely great in here as well, where you can actually heal back to full and you can put up a massive dots on the enemy targets. Now from there it is time to dot up the targets and watch the entire world burn. This is basically where your plaque will do a lot of damage. This is where it's gonna be sinking in, and this is where the enemy team starts slowly croaking. Basically here, by applying a cyclone, by applying AoE snares and actually tanking for your team, as a caster you actually have to tank it for your team, you let the enemy team run low, and after that, guess what, this is where it's time for you to shine. This is where you will need to have that multiple targets, have your basically plague slash skull throw combo work very well. And now here basically we're gonna be destroying the enemy team simply because of that. Now we are fighting against the Slayers. The Slayers are kind of a little bit too strong with their dot damage, and the cool thing about it is there's nothing more satisfying than to see a Slayer vanish with all your dots up and then they appear and almost instantly die. As a Necromancer, you start the fight by being literally a tank slash pillar. You wanna go there like first, you want to soak up some of that AoE damage and some cooldowns of the enemy team. Your dot damage is mediocre, but keep in mind that in the worst case scenarios, in the beginning, even popping the Lich is not a bad thing, because the poison that you actually apply from the Lich form can stack up and it can become very nasty. As your enemies get low, dot becomes a priority. Dot starts doing a lot more damage, up to 300% more damage. And this is your main finisher tool becomes. That's where you want to dot up the target and throw the skull as a finisher rather than throwing a skull to support your team to do more damage. So let's talk a little bit about the abilities. So which abilities did I decide to pick? Well, first of all I decided to go with the Wreath of Horror instead of the Grave. While the Grave is great and you can actually potentially exploit a lot of weaknesses in the enemy positions, and I could see this to be a very strong big in 10v10. Grave makes you a little bit more viable in terms of your personal distance preference, because the Rift of Horror, it's more of a melee ability when it comes to fear, and a lot of people who know how to kite Necromancer properly will exploit on that. So Grave will actually fill those gaps, so it's not completely useless ability, it's just something I don't like to use when I'm bug stomping the shit out of people. The second is, that's for your Lich form. Would you prefer a Volley of Darkness or Reaper Sweep? I go with the Volley of Darkness simply because it's less hunterable. If you go with a Sweep, you need to have a Grave, or at least you need to have a Cyclone, and you need to have fighting a few melee opponents that have actually been sitting on your ass this entire time. Also, with the Reaper Sweep, you will do a lot of damage, like kind of like a little bursty melee damage with the Scythe, but you will not do a lot of poison damage, and I kind of like the dot mechanics of a Necromancer, and that's what I'm going for, so that's why I picked Volley of Darkness. It's less counterable, it's used as a range heal tool, but it is a little bit harder to pull off in terms of your rotations. The third one, I decided to go with the Wall of Souls simply because if you put a debuff on them that reduces the damage taken by 28%, that is huge. That is humongous, especially when you're consistently getting trained by classes like Knights, Berserkers, or Paladins, the ones that don't do a lot of bursts, the ones that kind of don't try to line of sight you all the time, but the ones who actually try to consistently get on your ass and nagging. And obviously pre-burst, putting that on a pre-burst into other big classes is also huge. Last but not least, I decided to go with the Shield of the Banished. What it is you actually sacrifice your pet, and when you sacrifice your pet, you put a shield on yourself. It goes up to 50% of your HP if you have a trinket. Well, first of all, it's a great survivability tool. Second of all, one that I noticed is your abilities that actually cost HP will consume shield instead. Third of all, this shield is not affected by your time lapse, so you can sacrifice your shield and then time lapse back and you're still gonna have shield on yourself. Last but not least, it works perfectly with a talent, with a barrier talent that actually makes you immune to crowd control effects. So when the people try to hold down to those CCs in order to gimp you in the necro form, you can actually put a barrier on yourself, go into necro form, even if you are at 10k HP, even if you're at quarter HP, and just go and start mangling the shit out of people. Let's talk a little bit about the talents. The first of all, this is the must-have talent, is Accelerate Decomposition and the Fire Ska, Ancient Sorcery. Basically what it is your dot will do a lot more damage, up to 305% the lower HP levels of your enemy. Once you get to that sweet spot where the enemy is below 40%, your dot becomes extremely deadly. When you go below 40%, your dot will demolish the crap out of people. And to accelerate the decomposition, guess what? You're gonna be throwing skulls. Think about it as affliction luck, where you apply dots and then you throw the hunt out. Well, your skull essentially will increase the damage that they take in PvP by 21%. And that is huge. Especially, it's good for everybody. It's good even when you up with the teammates and you actually try to help out to burst down the target. Then we have is a barrier. Every time you put a barrier on yourself and you sack your pet, you become immune to CC. And obviously I explained it for obvious reasons. It's best to lifesteal in the lich form, having the barrier up. Obviously you want to go with the Torments of Hell. Basically what it is every time you fear them on a 1 minute cooldown, they will take automatic crits, and that is huge when you want to set up your burst on the other targets. Last but not least is Beyond. This is really good for your defensive play because it reduces cooldown of your time lapse, which is alter time, by 55%, and you can manually trigger it. And you're going to be time lapsing a lot, especially when you want to throw the skulls out or you want to summon your pets, because they do consume a lot of your HP. After that, you want to go with the Cyclone, and Cyclone is a must to have. I'm going to show you the mechanics of it in just a second. And Blood Poisoning is your bread and butter with Lich form. I sometimes pop a Lich form offensively just so I can actually apply those stacks of dot. Because of this, the poison that you apply in the Lich form can get up to 13-15k damage. And we're talking about 17k prestige, and that is huge. It potentially can be your highest damaging ability if done correctly. Last but not least, it's this guy, Fast Recovery. Well, out of combat healing by 100% increase is negligible, but the biggest thing about this guy is that any crit damage on you is going to be reduced by 25%. Needless to say that a lot of people said that the Cursed Viper is a good talent. Well, I tried it, and your Vipers rarely actually hit the target that you're summoning on, and until they either possibly get fixed or use that mechanic or it's easy to avoid their damage, this is not very strong. Last but not least, let's talk a little bit about the actual symbols, and let's talk a little bit about the gearing. So for the symbols, obviously there's still a lot for me to pick, but the ones I would say the must to have for me, at least what I found out, is Lacerated Wound, and then the Witch's symbol as well, because it will do a good amount of damage. Then after that, I also gonna go for the Luck crit damage base. Something I want to experiment with a little bit as well is actually how good is the bonus damage, and maybe I can forgo the strength and go for the bonus damage, because the way the bonus damage works in this game, essentially the higher HP on the target, the more damage you start doing to it, the lower it gets, the worse it gets. But for the Necromancer, it's all about getting targets below 40% HP and finishing them off. So Necromancer's weakness essentially is above 40% HP levels. Once the enemies gets lower than that, he becomes extremely deadly. Also, another thing for the talents I would like to see is Mark of Death, but one of the must-to-haves, at least in my opinion, is this guy right here, called Calculation. Damage dealt to enemies with more than 50% HP is increased by 15%. And that is huge for Necromancer, because that's his biggest weakness, is doing the damage to the targets above 50% HP. So there's going to be a lot for me to learn, and obviously I'm going to do an updated and much more clear and precise guide in the future when I actually have a lot of those symbols unlocked. So far this game is phenomenal and I'm enjoying it to biggest potential. So now for the equipment, I go for the either Skull Throw or I go for the Plague Damage, whichever has the highest item level. I would like to say at least should be a balance of the two, because the Plague Damage, your dot damage becomes absolutely incredible when the target gets low and you become extremely huge powerhouse, while the skulls are also good for the huge quick bursts and games during the Rift of Horror. And then obviously for the rings, I'd like to take a Strength and Luck. And basically go for the crit damage build itself. So that's it for now, guys. Let's watch some PvP videos and have fun. And I'll see you guys on my stream later on. Here, I want to show you guys the importance of a Cyclone. Knight is trying to get somebody, and I put a Cyclone and it gripped him back as well. And then the enemy kinetic actually got into the zone itself, so I applied my AoE dot and my other dot at the same time. And not only both of them failed to get on my Necromancer, I built pretty well here. I got extra pads for my shield as well, which gave me extra immunity as well. Now here I'm actually looking at it and I see that it's a perfect opportunity to go into Lich form because I cannot be CC'd, and the Knight cannot kite me really well here as well. So I tapped myself back to full, and we went 3 kills and 0 death on that matchup. So for this one, guys, I would like you to focus on the defensive gameplay style of the Necromancer itself. Beautiful class, really strong, really liking it. So first of all, we're gonna put the Cyclone here so it actually prevents and pulls the Knight back, so we don't want him to get on us just yet. Now here I got the dotted out by Slayer, and the dot is actually pretty overpowered, so I'm gonna pop the time lapse, sack my pad. I'm gonna actually time lapse back and get all my HP back. At this time I'm gonna sacrifice my pet for extra barrier, because otherwise the Slayer will put a dot on me and will take about 40 to 50% of my HP if not played correctly. Here I'm gonna be applying the fear and actually executing this kinetic as well, because he decided to approach us a little bit too fast. On the other hand, it's really good to spread out your dots as well. The Knight right now is popping his shield, so he's invulnerable, so that's why we're actually focusing on the Slayer itself. But then I'm gonna switch out back to Knight and dot him up. Remember guys, bread and butter, when the enemy gets low, you will do infinitely more damage. So I'm gonna apply the Cyclone, see how it grips back. So this gives me a perfect opportunity for my 3 combos, so I could actually legitimately apply my dots, because the thing about Necromancer, his cast times are extremely and infinitely slow, and to mitigate some of that, that's where the Cyclone actually helps. And we have a Slayer that came back from the stealth and he went down like a cracker.